And as we said, 1 year into the conflict in Ukraine, the toll of the conflict has started to show, and the backstage moves in the geopolitical arena, and more that is the evidence. To go on the matter, we invite political analyst Kayla Popuchet to join us. Bill, welcome, Kayla.
Hello, hi. Thank you for having me.
We are so grateful to having you in our program today. So let's start with our questions. Today, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has declared that victory is inevitable, and it's easy to say that when you have NATO and the European Union on your side, but if this were so, wouldn't they have won already in this conflict?
I think it's extremely obvious that we see that, Ukraine isn't fighting this war with Russia by itself. Russia is just one country up against all the NATO countries. The United States, the European Union, UK, Germany have given Ukraine billions of dollars and billions worth in weapons, all to fight Russia, and yet this conflict is still going on for over a year. Not only that, Ukraine's army is not just the Ukrainian army, it's not their own people. They're getting volunteers from all over the Western world, all over these young men who have signed up, who've been propagandized by their own governments to fight against Russia in a war that they have no business being in, just to proceed with Western interests in the region. So the fact that Volodymyr Zelensky will really think that victory is inevitable, given how much billions he's already been funded, given how many support he's been given in weapons and in manpower, and yet they're still going against Russia, really just shows the strength that the Russian army has, the Russian armed forces, over all of NATO united, all but, more declared in a declared way. NATO is absolutely fighting in this war. They're giving Ukraine money, they're giving Ukraine volunteers, they're giving Ukraine weapons, and yet they're still not victorious over Russia.
Yeah, it's kind of curious because they said it was an inevitable victory, but as you said, they had many support, they have weapons, they have the money, they had the troops, but it's 1 year ago, and nowadays they haven't won yet. But days ago, NATO top official Jens Stoltenberg accused China of a possible endorsement to Russia during the conflict. But precisely today, the United Security Council contemplated a Chinese proposal to end the conflict, and Zelensky himself was welcomed some elements of a Chinese proposal for a ceasefire. So how China could contemplate in the conflict? What do you think, or what is your opinion, or what's your point of view in this situation, in this conflict, and the role that China could play?
I think that from the very beginning, China hasn't been taking a role that's overly supportive of Russia. Although China is a sovereign country and China is allowed to make whatever decisions that it wants to, China has been more, favorable to Russia, more of a neutral position, more peaceful, obviously engaging in trade with Russia, while the Western world wants Russia to be completely isolated. That's not in China's interest. It's not in China's economic nor political interest, as they do have a favorable position and relationship with Russia. But China is still coming forward and trying to present this peace proposal because China has its own issues. China does not want to get dragged into a world war with Russia and all the NATO countries when China has already the United States in its backyard in Taiwan that's been gearing up with military offensives. We saw Nancy Pelosi, who was told by Chinese officials to not go to Taiwan, deliberately go against the will of Chinese officials and go to Taiwan anyway. So there is a lot of conflict that's gearing up in the Pacific as is, and China is not interested in escalating a war in Europe when it has its own issues at home that it has to look towards, especially because of U.S. imperialism.
Yeah, that's right, because China has a lot of to deal right now with the U.S., and I don't think that they want to get involved in the situation, but be like the first person involved in the situation with Ukraine. But lastly, just hours ago, the World Bank pledged $2.1 billion in aid to Ukraine. The U.S. also promised a new billionaire loan to Kiev, and some European nations will send more military equipment. Western economies are exhausted and strained in a conflict that does not involve them directly and that is blending them out. While smaller economies like India experiences this decreased growth. So what's the prospect for the major economies in the world during and after this conflict? because it's not easy being and spend that quantity of money in a world that is not yours, in a conflict that is not yours.
Well, it's kind of an investment if you think about it. For NATO countries, this is really, it's a symbolic. They're fighting Russia through Ukraine, but it really is symbolic of their own war. In a way, it is their own war, that they haven't declared war in their countries, but it is a war. It is their proxy war that they're using Ukraine to fight their battle, which is why they cannot lose, which is why they're spending billions of dollars as their own economies are on the brink of collapse, as their own citizens are stressing out and can't afford to put food on the table, pay for gas, or have heat in their homes. It's still worth it to the ruling class of these countries because this is their last chance to maintain hegemony. They absolutely cannot have a Russian victory in this region because therefore that marks the decline of Western hegemony over the world if Russia emerges powerful. And so it is kind of like a double-edged sword. One, they're ignoring their people at home, and we're seeing protests arising all over the West. There was just one last week in the United States. We've seen them across Europe already, where people are saying they are against NATO, they are against US or Western involvement in this war, and yet the ruling classes of these countries just cannot let go because this is the last grip of power that they have. And so they are willing to sacrifice everything, their own economies, just to make sure that there won't be a Russian victory. And yet they still can't even help that. They still can't even prove that. And another aspect to it that I think is very interesting that we need to consider is all the billions of dollars that Ukraine has received from all these countries. What's going to happen to Ukraine in the end? When these Western countries come knocking on Ukraine's door and say, all right, it's time to pay up. We gave you billions of dollars. Will there be a Russian victory? Or are they going to ask Russia for compensation for all the money that they gave back to Ukraine? If there is a so-called Ukrainian victory, then does Ukraine just become a vassal state where their country is cut up into different pieces of how much each country has given? Germany gets this much, the UK gets this much, the US gets, the southern region, Poland gets this much. What's really going to happen? We're giving all this money to Ukraine willy-nilly, but is nobody stopping to asking, what are we going to do when it's time for Ukraine to pay back? Ukraine is in an incredibly disenfranchised position because either way, there is no winning situation for Ukraine. Either Ukraine capitulates to Russia or Ukraine becomes a vassal state of the West, even more than it already is.
Yeah, thank you for your explanation in all our questions. We are so glad to having you in this interview. So thank you very much. Till next time.